Welcome back to Charm and Circumstance. This is Ashley Bruggeman, and today I am so excited to talk to my guest, Miss Kentucky 2025, Ariana Rodriguez, a woman whose story embodies resilience, faith, and courage. Ariana is the first former foster youth to place in the top 11 at the Miss America pageant, a milestone that's as historic as it is inspiring. In this episode, we're going to talk about her experience growing up in the foster care system, what it took to pursue ambition and purpose despite incredible odds, and how she's now using her platform to advocate for change. From floor plans to 5-year plans, business to finding balance, I'm Ashley Bruggeman, an interior designer with a love for beautiful living and a belief that style and substance go hand in hand. I'm pulling back the curtain on design, resilience, and entrepreneurship. Expect real talk, refined tips, and just the right mix of polish and personality. So pour something sweet and join me for a thoughtful conversation with a generous helping of charm and circumstance. Ariana, welcome to Charm and Circumstance.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your story first. So before the pageants, before the crown, tell us about your childhood and your experience just growing up in foster care.
Yeah, so most people, when they think of Miss Kentucky, they think about the glamour and the glitz and the sparkly crown and sash, but my story was very different. In fact, I grew up in kinship and foster care. So at 5 years old, I was placed in my first kinship home, and between the ages of 5 and 12, I entered about 20 different placements. So I lived all over the state in different homes, went to different schools, transitioned over 20 times. And then when I was 12 years old, I was separated from my sister and placed in the Kentucky foster care system. So I stayed in the system for about a year and a half, 2 years, and I was only with one foster family, but the experience was more difficult than kinship care because you're placed with a stranger, and that's difficult in itself, but also I had never been separated from my sister before, and so that was really difficult. And then at 14 years old, I was reunified with my biological mother, who was homeless at the time. So we lived out of an abandoned house for about a year. And then I moved out when I was 16, and I lived out of my car for 2 years. So I was a homeless teenager from 16 to 18 until I enrolled at the University of Kentucky.
Oh my goodness. Like, I just am floored by your resilience.
Thank you.
I mean, I really am. What people or moments or mentors even do you think changed the trajectory of your story?
Definitely my younger brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they've been through similar situations that I have, and just to see that they're younger than me and can still control their emotions. They still control how they react to other circumstances, even when they can't control their own circumstances. And just to see how hard they work for a better future really made me work harder for mine. And I also wanted to give them a positive example. You know, we grew up living with a lot of different people, but never did we have like a solid role model that stuck with us for years. And I wanted to be that for them. So I think that having them there, and I could rely on them, but also just knowing that they were relying on me really pushed me to be the best that I can be.
Yeah.
I also had a lot of mentors within the Miss America organization. Kimberly Lyle in specific was my local director. It was the first pageant I ever signed up for. And so I had put all of my college savings into competing when I was a senior. My senior year of high school, I realized that I had exited foster care 26 days too early to receive any financial aid. And so I wasn't going to have a way to pay for college, and I knew that I wanted to get higher education. So that's when I looked up talent competitions. And when I first found my old Kentucky home, I didn't realize that it was a pageant. I thought that it was a talent competition. And so I'm scrolling through, and eventually I realized it's a pageant. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, there's no way you're going to get me in a pageant. I'm not doing it. And then I scrolled down a little bit more and saw a $20,000 scholarship, and I signed up
Maybe I
right then.
will.
Yeah. And I did. I had put all of my college savings into competing. The last 2 years of high school, I was working 3 jobs. I worked at Fazoli's in Bardstown. I worked at Belmar Floral and Events, and I worked as a daycare worker. And so I was working a lot. I'd saved up probably like a little bit over $1,000, and I put everything into competing. A lot of people don't realize how expensive pageants are. And so I had to buy the dress for evening gown. I had to buy the dress for talent, earrings, makeup, because I'd just never done anything like that before. And so I put everything into competing, and I lost. And I remember Kimberly came up to me after, and she said, if you want to go to Miss Kentucky, we'll get you there. And she put out a post on Facebook asking people for donations to help fund my way to Miss Kentucky. And I mean, people from across the country sent in funds to help me, even though they didn't know me. They'd never heard my story. They just heard that somebody wanted to pursue this crazy dream and couldn't afford it. And she's definitely been a role model, not only because of that initial, meeting, but anytime that I need anything, whether it's a friend, whether it's somewhere to go on Thanksgiving, whether it's, just additional help with mock interviews or preparation for Miss America, preparation for Miss Kentucky, she was always there. And even after I had placed at Miss America, she was still there just asking, what she could do for me personally. It wasn't just about the crown and the sash. She genuinely was a role model for every aspect of my life.
So you were with your siblings until you moved out at 16?
So I was with my siblings until I entered foster care at 12. I got placed in the same foster home with my younger brother, but our younger sister stayed with our biological parents.
Okay.
Which still I don't completely understand, because, if it was unsafe for two kids, how would it not? Anyway, I'm not really sure, but I was separated from her, and then I got placed back with my biological mom. So my sister was with my biological mom, and then we all three lived together for that year and a half that we lived out of the abandoned house. And then when I moved out at 16, that's when I had to stop seeing my younger sister again. But when I turned 18, a lot of that changed. I went to college. My sister came and visited with me, and she comes over to my house and spends a lot of time with me now. So we've definitely been able to grow our relationship stronger.
Yeah, that's amazing. What do you think that people misunderstand most about children in foster care?
Well, so many times you're labeled as a bad kid. And specifically for youth who are in their teenage years, my brother and I were 12 and 10, and so we didn't really face that as much as some of the other people that we were around. But when you hit 13, 14, 16, 17, those ages are the hardest because nobody wants a teenager. They want little cute babies, because that's what makes them feel good. They don't want to deal with the so-called problems of having a teenager. And there is this stereotype that if you're a teenager and you haven't got adopted and you've been in foster care for a while, that you're a bad kid, and there must be some hidden reason as to why you haven't been placed with a stable, loving family. And that's just not true. In fact, when you go through a certain amount of homes when you're in foster care, even if it wasn't your fault at all, this happens to a lot of kids who are on the spectrum. They have a lot of difficulties, and it costs a lot more money. And so a lot of foster parents are not willing to put in, the extra effort. And so they will transition to multiple homes. And once you reach a certain amount of homes, even if it wasn't your fault that you got removed, you're labeled at risk. And so you're transferred to a residential facility, which is more of like an institutional setting. And residential facilities are kind of known for creating an environment that's not helpful. If you've been placed in a foster home, you're a lot less likely to become sex trafficked or become homeless or in prison when you exit care. But if you're placed in a residential facility with a whole bunch of other kids who are also labeled as bad kids, even if they aren't, you kind of live up to that name. You live up to that label because it's what everyone is expecting you to do. And so I think that one of the misconceptions that I hear a lot is that kids in foster care are bad kids, or a lot of foster parents that I talk to that maybe have considered fostering, a lot of their reasoning behind why they didn't choose to is they're scared for their biological kids.
Mm-hmm.
And in part, I understand, being in foster care, a lot of the kids that I grew up with had experienced trauma that
Mm-hmm.
most people can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that they're bad people. I
Right.
mean, they need the same help that everyone else would need if they went through the same
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so I think that labeling them kind of as criminals does more harm than good. And I wish that more foster parents understood that these aren't, troubled people. These are children at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and people need to treat them as such.
Yeah, 100%. So, what did home mean to you growing up, and how has that definition evolved over time?
I mean, it's pretty much stayed the same. Home to me has always been my younger brother and sister.
Mm.
No matter what school we went to, no matter what home we lived in, whether it was a really, really nice house in one of the better areas of Louisville, or whether it was a very small trailer that we were sharing with two other families in Russell Springs, Kentucky. I mean, it didn't matter where we were because we always had each other. And so that has stayed true throughout my entire life. I mean, my brother and sister and I have been close since we were little bitty kids, and
Yeah.
that hasn't changed.
Yeah. I mean, you all were clearly each other's stability
Mm-hmm.
through any unstable circumstances. So you've talked before about finding strength in instability. How did you learn to keep dreaming when life didn't make it easy to?
Again, just going back to my younger brother and sister, just remembering that if I wasn't that role model, if I wasn't that spokesperson for them, that they might not have that in their lives. And so anytime that it got hard, which it did, I mean, I can think of 100 times where I was sitting there thinking, I can't do this anymore. I used to carry around a picture of my brother and sister in my wallet on the back of my phone. And anytime I was going through something, I'd just look at it. And that would be just a very simple reminder that, you're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing this so that what you went through doesn't happen to anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up being with the responsibilities of a parent.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. It's incredible how resilience can grow from such difficult beginnings. And now you've gone from foster homes to a stage that celebrates confidence and purpose, the Miss America stage. And it's such a contrast, the two worlds, I think. The pageant world is often seen as glamorous and polished in a world of gowns, lights, and applause. But for you, it's been something much deeper, a platform to rewrite the narrative. So, what first drew you to pageants? I know you've said it was scholarship money. Did you even have an idea that beyond scholarship money, it would give you a voice?
I knew from the first time I entered into the pageant, when I initially signed up, it was just for scholarship money. I'm going to be completely honest. I wasn't really even interested in ever winning. I just wanted some financial aid. And when I first competed in that first pageant, there were girls who I was competing against who paid my fees to Miss Kentucky. There were girls who bought me dresses and who let me use their earrings and who did my makeup, even though they were competing against me. And so I think that kept me interested because there's a negative stereotype about pageant girls. I mean, if you watch movies like Toddlers and Tiaras and Miss Congeniality, you see that we're portrayed as girls who are out to get each other and would do anything to win. And that just hasn't been the case for me. I've only ever competed in the Miss America system, so I'm not sure what other systems are like, but for me, the Miss America system has allowed me to make friendships that I will carry on for the rest of my life. Not only at the local and state level, but at the national level. I mean, I have met other title holders that have just changed my life. I know 3 off the top of my head that would definitely be in my wedding. Like, that's how close you get because you are competing for an opportunity to change your life. And that's not something light, and having that experience together is just something that you do carry with you for the rest of your life. Going to Miss America, especially because there were a couple other contestants who are around my age. The cutoff for Miss America is 28. So being 20, I was one of the youngest ones, and I got very, very close with Miss Tennessee and Miss Indiana, Miss Wisconsin, because we were all very young. And so to be able to share that experience as young people who are trying to figure out, how to be a title holder, but also trying to figure out how to be an adult at the same
Yeah.
time, was just really cool to see, because a lot of times people think that, Miss Kentucky, Miss America, these title holders are, these superstars and these models. And we do modeling, we do news interviews, we do podcasts like this, but at the end of the day, we are just people. And it was nice to see other girls who shared that.
Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea there was that big of an age range between the competitors. I mean, that's a big gap.
Oh, yeah, 18 to 28. I mean,
and that's a huge gap in your life of that's a lot of growth happens.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like I became a different person within that range. So that'll be interesting. I can't even imagine how fabulous you're going to be at 28. You're already this cool. So how did it feel stepping into that environment for the first time, coming from such a different world?
I definitely had a bit of imposter syndrome. Like, even after I won, I just felt like I didn't deserve it, that I didn't really know what I was doing as much as the other girls, because, I grew up not thinking about how ironed my pants are, what my makeup looked like. I remember my biggest worries growing up being, when am I going to eat next, and where am I going to sleep tonight? So being around that environment where everyone has the ability to focus on those things was a little discouraging at first, because, I just wasn't focused on that. I was focused on the impact that I could make, and I was focused on how to get to where I wanted to be, not as much the glitz and the glamour of everything. And at first I did feel kind of like an outsider. And then that first pageant, I mean, everything changed. I remember the girls came up to me and they wanted to give me the same opportunity. I remember one girl who paid some of my fees. I was like, why would you do that? You're competing against me. You know that, right? And she said, if I'm going to win, then I want to win because I earned it, not because I had more resources than you. And that just kind of changed the way that I looked about everything. I realized that, we were competing against each other, but you have to live with yourself. When you take off the crown and the sash, whether you win, whether you lose, you have to live with the person that you are. And so to know that I was surrounded by girls who were doing things based on that concept, based on the knowledge that they had the potential to change someone's life, and they chose to do that when they didn't have to. I mean, it just completely transformed the way that I looked at it. And there have, of course, been moments. I remember after I won Miss Kentucky, people were going around saying that I only won because I was in foster care and because I was homeless. There were people saying that I made it up. And so during that time, it was really difficult, because here I am trying to celebrate and enjoy, the first couple weeks of being Miss Kentucky, and I just constantly was hearing these things about, I didn't deserve it, and I'd already felt like an imposter. I'd already felt like I didn't deserve it, but I had to listen to the people who were in my corner. A lot of girls that I competed with, they were like, you earned this. You might be 20 years old. You might have only competed for a couple years, but you won fair and square. And, nothing that anybody else says can take that away. And so I really leaned on the girls during that part of my life. And I've gotten over that. I don't feel like an imposter. I know that the work that I'm doing matters. And I know that even though my journey looks different than everyone else, it created a pathway for other people like me to do it.
Exactly.
It was really difficult because I was the first, and it never happened before. So of course there's going to be backlash, but to know that if another girl watching this hears it and is like, oh, she did that, so I can do it too.
Right.
It'll be just a little bit easier for her because I've already went through it.
100%. And I think that's in the same way that your motivation through so many situations was your siblings growing up. It's like that this situation of knowing how you have this power now to affect all of these little girls who are in, what were your shoes before, and that they have you to look at and see the possibilities for them. I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
How did your background in foster care shape the way that you approached competition, confidence, and even stage presence? You mentioned that there were other young women in the competition who, I think it's amazing that, were willing to come alongside you and help you out, even though they were fighting for something, competing for something, that I'm assuming they've wanted for a long time. And so that's really, I think, reassuring. But I can imagine how overwhelming that may have been. And I'm assuming your mom was not by your side through these pageants, or was she?
My mom has always been focused on dealing with her own problems that I don't think she has the capacity to deal with anyone else's, so she wasn't very heavily involved, but I did have a great support system. When I first started competing, I was very I put a lot of pressure on myself. I was like, you can't go out there and embarrass yourself. Everybody already thinks that you don't know what you're doing, so you just have to go out there and prove them wrong. And I just remember my first year competing in Miss Kentucky's teen 3 years ago, I was putting so much pressure on myself to be the best, not only for me, but also I knew that people were looking at me. And I just put so much pressure on myself to be 10 times better than I had ever been before, every single time I competed. And while you should push yourself, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. It wasn't just, you have to place well. I was like, no, I have to win, because if I don't, then my brother and sister are going to think that they can't accomplish their dreams. Mm-hmm. Other people who have been in foster care are going to think that, they can't accomplish their dreams. And I think that transitioned this year into me just understanding that, yes, if I were to have won Miss Kentucky, and now I get to say this, but when I won Miss Kentucky, I was the first foster alumni to ever win. And when I went to Miss America and made top 11, I was the first to ever do so. But I was also the first local title holder in Kentucky to have ever grown up in the foster care system. And so this year, instead of putting a lot of pressure on myself to walk away with the crown, I just kept telling myself, you've already made history. You don't have to win everything to know that you deserve your spot here. You have earned the right to stand on the stage. And so I think that transformed everything about this year. I don't think that I would have won this year if I would have gone into it with the same mindset of you have to win. Yeah. Instead of focusing on, you have to win, you have to take home the crown, you have to prove everyone wrong and, let people know that they can do anything that they set their mind to. I went into it and I was like, you've already done those things. Yeah. Being here, being on the Miss Kentucky stage, you've already proved people wrong. You've already shown people that they can try things that they never thought that they could do. You've already shown your brother and sister that there's more than foster care. And so that transformed the way that I went about this year, from the local competition all the way up to the national one.
You are wise beyond your years. I mean, you really are, because I get that. I get the kind of like being the underdog in a situation. But as soon as you have one win or success, we'll call it, it's just like you just start back at zero again. Mm-hmm. And the pressure just keeps building. And yet it's something that it doesn't really need to exist, mm-hmm. right? And like that you have the wherewithal to grasp that and see that, like, I mean, what are you going to go on and, I mean, like you have to win Miss Universe to like make a difference. I mean, that's crazy. And so I didn't realize that you were the only local pageant winner mm-hmm. across Kentucky who's been in the foster care system.
Yeah. In all of history, which is insane to say. I was the 90th Miss Kentucky, and I was the only contestant that's ever grown up in foster care. Because, I mean, if you think about it, no system, and this isn't just about pageants, no system is set up for people like me. Mm-hmm. Even when you think about, simple things that a lot of us take for granted, if you've exited foster care and you don't have a financial support from your family. You need to get a house, but you can't get a house without a job because you can't pay for it. And how are you supposed to get to work without a car? But you can't buy a car without a job. So it's like they're kind of set up for failure. And then you add on something as extravagant as Miss America. I mean, when I submitted my Miss America paperwork, there was a place where you had to list your parents' contact information. And I'm not in contact with my parents. And so we had to contact Miss America and say, you know, the system isn't set up for people like me. Like, what was I supposed to put on that? And so just knowing that there's so many tiny obstacles that normal people just going about their lives wouldn't even think of.
Right.
And yet to see it on the other side where I did have to work almost 10 times harder than everybody else to get to the exact same place because of something that I had no control over.
Right.
That was pretty difficult. But like I said before, I think that me doing this and kind of creating that pathway for others to do the same was the best thing that could have come out of this platform and this title.
Do you, while that's so true that you have had to work 10 times harder to get to the same place, do you see, though, that you're also like 10 times further ahead of like people who, let's say, haven't had to overcome big obstacles like you have, right? Like, because you have this, while no one would wish this on anyone, right? But like you have developed this inner strength and resilience to situations that, you know, and a normal person would like maybe have a meltdown over something, and you're like, girl, like.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I think it kind of, like, I know that I have some advantages based on what I've went through, because, like you said, I was, when I was growing up, I was worried about, you know, when I was going to eat, when I was going to sleep, how I was going to get to school. I was worried about those things. So now when I do have like a simple problem, it is easier for me. But there's a lot of situations that I think are more difficult for me as well. I kind of am always in flight or fight.
Yeah.
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, growing up, that was the way that I survived.
Of course.
And one of the very specific, like, niche things that I was just thinking about was I just forgot what I was going to say. I was like there, and then it was like, what?
Literally, that is me all the time.
What was I going to say?
Fight or flight, and like the pros of what you've overcome.
You know, I have no idea. I have no idea where I was going with that, but I'm sure it was going to be good.
Yeah. Maybe it'll come to you later.
Maybe. We'll come back to that.
One thing that, like, I don't know, I thought of as you were talking is that I ran for office years ago, and I was really, the thing that made me most nervous to do it was that I knew I didn't have the family support to do it. So, like, not from my parents, not, I was single. And so I was really like nervous about it. And to be honest, that was difficult. And really, like, any big decisions moving forward as a 44-year-old now, and it's still in the same situation, being a single woman, a single mother, is, I don't know, I've had to like overcome this feeling of being alone or having to like fight battles independently and without that kind of structure behind me. But at the same time, I've also, much like you've done, you know, you end up with these other people who like step in and become that role for you. And then, and I would imagine to say, as you get older too, your friendships become your family, like your girlfriends. And so like 1,000 times, I would say, my girlfriends are closer to me than any
Mhm.
family. And but it's also like shaped decisions in what have felt confident in going after. And that's, I think, probably why, I mean, everybody's moved by your story, but I am just like in awe of at your young age being able to put yourself out there like that in those circumstances. Um, because I mean, my only experience was running for office, but you're, criticized and you're all sorts of things publicly and feel like an imposter as well. And so it's just something, I don't know, I think that's probably why I was just immediately like touched by what you have overcome and stepping out into that world.
Well, thank you. I remember when I was first starting pageants, I had that imposter syndrome and I didn't really feel like I could accomplish anything in pageantry after I lost that first pageant. And I just remember telling myself, I was so worried about people judging me and about me doing bad, and people would see that. And I remember telling myself after that first pageant, you had the guts to go up there when you didn't have clothes that fit you, when you didn't know what you were doing. You bet on yourself even then because you knew that you were destined for more. And so
Mm.
all of these people saying, oh, well, she didn't win, that was embarrassing. Or when I went to Miss America, and I didn't win Miss America, but I put everything out there. There were people talking about it and talking about how I could have done better. And of course I could have, but I mean, these things happen. And I I just remember sitting there after Miss America and hearing everybody kind of talk about, she should have done better if this would have been this girl or this girl, and
Mm-hmm.
she would have done better. And I was talking to my little sister, and we were talking about the fact that, I didn't have to compete. I didn't have to do it. The fact that I stepped up knowing that there could be a chance that I'd walk away with nothing,
Mm-hmm.
that says more than somebody sitting on their couch talking about how I didn't win, but they've never put themselves out there like that. Like if you really want to accomplish your dreams, if you want to win Miss Kentucky, you're going to have to lose Miss Kentucky about 100 times before
Yes.
you get there. You have to be, if you want to accomplish your dreams, if you want to achieve everything that you want to achieve in your life, failure has to be a part of that because that's the only way that you get to where you want to be. And so that also changed my perspective about a lot of things. Trying takes more guts than anything, and I've learned so much more by failing than I have by winning. I remember so many more lessons that I have learned by losing pageants than I ever did by winning them. And so it's a part of it, and I think sometimes people try to disregard that. And,
Mm.
especially in this role,
Mm-hmm.
they expect us to be perfect
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And that's not realistic. And that was really one of my goals throughout this year, was to be the most authentic Miss Kentucky that I could be,
Mm-hmm.
to be completely myself, to talk about things that make people uncomfortable, to talk about the lessons that I've learned. And obviously I'm a polished Miss Kentucky. I'm never going to talk bad about anyone. I'm never going to do something that is inherently wrong, but I am going to speak my mind, and I am going to say my situation and the lessons that I've learned from that, because that is authentically me. And to know that even when 100 people are telling me that I'm doing it wrong, I can be myself every single day and know that that's right. Because if I were to be anyone else, then it would not be right. It wouldn't be me.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a facade. And so
Mm-hmm.
to know that even if I don't win Miss America, even if I don't do good at an appearance, maybe I mess up the words to a song or say the wrong thing, I was authentically myself. I think that doing that and knowing that failure is an option and being okay with failing is a lot more of an accomplishment than expecting to win all the time, if that makes sense.
100%. And people are so much more drawn to authenticity than they are perfection,
Mm-hmm.
because they all know that perfection isn't real, and that it's also unattainable, and authenticity is vulnerable, and all of those things just make others, it draws others to you all the more. Um, so when you lost that first pageant, that's when Kim approached you?
Hmm.
If she hadn't, do you think you would have tried again?
I don't think so. I think I would have tried another way to get
Mm-hmm.
financial aid, but I don't think that I would have went back
Mm-hmm.
because at that point I was in a pretty bad place. I was living out of my car and this was the only money that I had. And so it was like,
Yeah.
if she didn't come up to me, not that I didn't want to, but I couldn't. I mean, I couldn't
Yeah.
afford to pay the $25 entry fee to a
Mm-hmm.
pageant. That's how difficult that it was at that point in my life. And so I don't think that I would have competed again because
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to.
Right. Yeah. I love that there are Kims out there.
Hmm. We love Mama Kim.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, and that's, yeah, what people should be.
Hmm.
Um, so I love that the idea that beauty and purpose aren't opposites and
Hmm.
they can coexist. And you've used your platform not just to shine personally, but to spotlight something very much bigger, the foster care system and the young people still navigating it today. So let's talk about redefining the system and your advocacy for reform and vision for the future. So, the work that you're doing now, of course, your advocacy is very powerful and deeply personal. So, what's the mission behind your current platform or initiative?
Yeah, so I run a nonprofit called the Lucky Ones Foundation, and our goals are to amplify the voices of youth in foster care and educate the public about the issues that they face. So many people don't know what it's like to be a kid in foster care. They might know that, they're placed with a family that they have never known before foster care. But a lot of people have this idea that, foster care is a system where people are taken out of neglecting homes and placed with a safe and loving family. And while that can be true, a lot of times it's not.
Mm-hmm.
50% of youth who have experience within the foster care system will become homeless or in prison within the first 2 years of exiting care. 3% get a bachelor's degree and less than 1% get a master's degree. And it's not because they're less ambitious or less talented or less intelligent, it's because they're not given the same playing field. And there are very systemic challenges that youth in foster care face, like getting a job. Because if you think about it, these kids in foster care, much like myself, were so worried about surviving that you don't think about what to wear to an interview. You don't think
Right.
about what to put on a resume. You think about what you're going to eat for dinner.
Right.
And so these kids a lot of times age out at 18 and revert to what they've always known, what they've always seen around them. And a lot of times that is homelessness or
Mm-hmm.
imprisonment because it is the only way that they know how to survive. A lot of kids in foster care enter prison not because they have done something wrong, because they just wanted to do something wrong, but because they know that if they go into jail, they'll have food and they'll have a place to live. And
Mm-hmm.
that's better than, being an 18-year-old girl on the streets. And unfortunately, it's a very systemic cycle and one that most people don't realize. And so our goals are not only to educate the public, but also to give youth in foster care a voice to share their own stories and their own concerns. I have mine, I have my story, but I always tell people others only listen to me because I wear a sparkly crown and sash. If
Mm-hmm.
nobody wanted to hear my story before I won Miss Kentucky, and
Mm.
that's just the truth. And so I always try to use my platform, to use the microphone that I've been given and hand it off to somebody else whose story wouldn't be listened to unless it was me introducing them. And
Mm-hmm.
as unfortunate as that is, I really do try to use this platform to give other people a chance to share their experiences because similarly to everyone in foster care being labeled as a bad kid, we're all kind of labeled, like we're all put in this same box, like
Mm-hmm.
all kids in foster care are the
Mm-hmm.
same. And that's not true. I mean, just like if you put 10 random people in a room, none of them are going to have the same name or the same hobbies. You might have some common interests, but you're not going to be the same. And so you don't need to be labeled as such. And so
Mm-hmm.
really trying to change the narrative of what youth in foster care are perceived as is one of the main goals.
Mm-hmm. How are you going to go about doing that?
Gosh, we have so many initiatives. My board, so I have a board of 13 members, and then we have about 40 volunteers across the state, and my board is so incredible. I mean, they're constantly coming up with new initiatives. We have our suitcase project. So when I was just placed in foster care, I was given a trash bag to put my most prized possessions in. And so we started the suitcase project to give every child in foster care in the state of Kentucky a suitcase filled with essential items that they need when they transition from home to home. We've been able to give almost 4,000 this year alone, which is absolute insanity to say out loud, but
That's amazing. And I'm going to put in the show notes how people can donate.
Okay, perfect.
You just donate suitcase with these items.
So you can donate the items, you can donate money to our organization, you can donate a suitcase. We do collections. You can take them to our office at the Gatton Student Center and the University of Kentucky campus, or you can set up a meeting and we'll come to you and collect them and distribute them. You can also, you don't have to go through our organization to do this. You can look up your local foster care agencies and they would be happy to collect them from there.
Okay.
But aside from the Suitcase Project, we have a podcast, the Lucky Ones podcast. So I interview youth who have been in foster care, legislators, social workers, and that, again, just educates the public, but also gives youth in foster care a place to share their stories without any constraints. I don't edit it at all. If I mess up, it stays in there. If we say the wrong thing, it stays in there, unless they ask me to take it out, of course. But it's really a platform where they can say anything that they want. They can get angry. They can be upset, because so many times when you're in foster care, you're told to hide those things. And so it's a platform where they can be just 100% authentically themselves. We have the life skills series. We send professionals to residential facilities to teach them those life skills, like how to do your taxes, what to write on a resume, what to wear to an interview. And we do a gift card project for youth who are aging out or youth who have just graduated. So we give them gift cards so that makes it just a little bit easier for them to transition into independent life. There's so many others that I could say, but all of them are listed on our website. It's www.the-lucky-ones.org, and that's probably better than me sitting here explaining it for an hour.
No, that's fine. Speaking of the transition out, how does that work? Are there any programs in place for to help with that? And is it like you turn 18 and you're out, or is there something different there?
So when you turn 18, children, or I shouldn't say children because they're 18, youth can decide whether or not they want to stay in foster care. But the thing is, you have to have been in foster care on your 18th birthday to receive any of those supports. So whereas I was homeless, and even though I'd been in foster care for the majority of my life, foster care and kinship care, that is, I didn't receive any of the financial aid because I wasn't in foster care on my 18th birthday.
So that's so interesting too. I meant to ask you that earlier, because I always thought that Kentucky law was that if you had ever been in the foster care system at any point, you received financial aid for school. And that's
unfortunately not. No.
And it was never that before that you know of?
Not that I know of. I was told that if I stayed in foster care past my 13th birthday, or my 14th, I can't remember, so past some birthday, then I would get financial aid. But I again, exited 26 days too early to receive any of it. And I'm not sure what the laws are now, but I do know that it's very hard for youth to go through foster care and not stay in it, because although it is extremely difficult to stay in foster care until your 18th birthday, you get so many resources. You can enter into independent living, which is kind of extended foster care until you're 21. So youth who become, adults while they were in foster care, they're eligible for that. But people like me who maybe left before aren't eligible for anything, even if you've been in foster care your entire life. And so a lot of kids get kind of, they fall into the cracks because there's so many resources out there, but they're only eligible to certain people, and you have to meet all the regulations, and a lot of kids don't even know what those are. And so they realize way too late that they're not eligible for the things. And so that's one of the biggest problems right now.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, I mean, kinship care, what I was in for the majority of my life, how many people live with their grandparents? You know, if we were to say, okay, if you've ever been in kinship care, then you can receive this, then we'd be paying a lot more money in taxes. And so,
Mm-hmm.
from like, I used to work as an intern in the Capitol, from going from that to also seeing like how I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
I can see both sides, but I'm not really sure how it can be fixed. But I know that there are so many kids who go without simply because they didn't stay in foster care until their 18th birthday, and that definitely needs to be changed. I think that to be able to find a solution that works for everyone, we need to work together on this issue. And a lot of people don't realize it's an issue, so that collaboration
Mm-hmm.
isn't really happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that I can use my platform to really advocate for those issues and get people talking about it so that we can
Yeah.
create a solution that works for both sides.
100%. And I think the fact that, especially, I mean, it's the case with so much legislation, but in this circumstance, it's not a black and white
Mm-hmm.
scenario. And like, I can't imagine it being something that, like, okay, if it's this date, then no, you get cut off. And if it's this date, then you get a free ride.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's like just so extreme. And especially when dealing with a 17 or 18-year-old who has barely any control, if any, over their situation, whether they are in the system or they're not, or all of these things, that I would imagine that there is something that can be done about that. Would you say that that is really the biggest gap? Is
Oh, yes, definitely.
yeah.
Because, I mean, if you don't give the people who are aging out the resources and supports that they need, statistically, they're more likely to end up having children, to go into prison, to go and become homeless, and then their children
The
are more
cycle
likely
continues.
to
Yeah.
enter into foster care. And it is a very repetitive and systemic system. So we can talk about suitcases and we can talk about, therapists, and all of these things are great. They are very helpful to kids. But if we don't fix the root issue,
Mm-hmm.
if we don't fix the amount of children who are being left behind by the system and are kind of forgotten about, then we'll never make true progress because the cycle will just keep repeating itself.
Right. So, what would you love to see at either the state or a national level for children in care? So, we talked about like the teenagers, and aging out, but what about the younger children?
For any youth in foster care, I would like for them to have a place in the court setting where they can share their stories. I've talked to this with the Kentucky court judges. Every
Mm-hmm.
judge in Kentucky has heard me talk about this before, so it might be a little bit repetitive to some, but we can do everything necessary to equip these youth in foster care with the skills that they need. But if they feel like no one is in their corner, they're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to give them a voice to share their stories. I remember I wrote dozens upon dozens of letters to caseworkers and judges, and they would throw them away in front of me. Sometimes they would throw them away, and they would say, "No, you're too young." And while I do understand that a lot of youth have been through trauma, and they might be subjected to, one parent telling them, "Say this, say that,"
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to do what the child wants you to do, but you do need to listen to them. You need to give them the chance to say what they're thinking, because yes, I was, 9, 10, 14 years old. All these times that I wrote these letters, but I had also raised 2 children by the time I was 9 years old. So it was like, yes, I am a child, but also I am only a child when it's convenient for you guys, because I'm having to sit here and I'm having to act as if I'm adult in every other situation. But when it really comes down to it, I'm a child. And that's really unfortunate, because I grew up, thinking like, what is my role here? If I'm not being listened to in the court system, then why do I have to be a parent at 9 years old? Why do I have to be responsible for everything else if I can't even control my own life? Because I mean, I was controlling everything to make sure that my younger brother and sister and I were successful. And I was really not only was I one parent, I was doing the job of 2 parents while being a child myself, and still doing schoolwork. And I mean, I remember I used to get up hours before I had to go to school to get my brother and sister ready, and then I could do it. And I'd have to stay up later every night to make sure that I did my homework after I put the kids to bed. And it was like I had wrote these dozens of letters saying how I was being treated at home and in the different kinship homes and in foster care agencies, and nobody was listening to me because I was a child. And I think that needs to be changed. We also need to treat them like people.
Mm-hmm.
These kids are not just a case to be managed. They're not just a number or a statistic. They're real people with lives and dreams and ambitions and challenges. And so many times when I was in foster care, people wouldn't even introduce themselves to me. They would just say, "Hey, get in my car. Hey, do this or do that." And it was like we were treated like criminals, and we're children.
Yeah.
It's a hard concept to grasp that you are a child, but yet you're also an adult, but you're also a criminal, but you're also a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lots of labels.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So what message would you want to share with young people in the foster system right now who might feel unseen or stuck?
This is very cliche, but just keep going. Even when it seems like every single odd is against you, you kind of have to get borderline obsessive with your goals. And I tell this to anyone, not just youth in foster care. But if you want something badly enough, pour everything into it. I remember my senior year of high school when I was living out of my car. I was sitting in the parking lot trying to do my homework one day, and I remember looking around, being like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't. I have no family. I have no future. I have no, substance for my life. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just remember telling myself, if you really feel like you have nothing, then why not put everything into it? Like, you have nothing to lose. And I think that's what got me through, is just getting borderline crazy with it. Like, I remember being 18 years old and spending every single second that I had doing anything that I thought would better myself. I remember reading dozens of books. I remember working out until I couldn't anymore. I remember, just joining every club that I could and trying to become a leader in all those clubs, because when you're at that point where you feel hopeless and you feel like you don't have anything else, you have nothing to lose. And so it's the perfect opportunity to go after anything that you want. And so I would say that to kids. If you're feeling, lost, if you're feeling hopeless, then lean into everything that you've ever wanted to do before you give up. And I remember telling myself, if I do everything that I possibly can and it still doesn't work out, then sure, you can give up, but not until you've tried everything. And so that's the advice that I would give to young people.
My goodness, you are unbelievable.
Thank you.
Gosh, if only I could have been as wise as you at 20 years old. So what's next for you after Miss Kentucky, after Miss America's over now? How do you see this purpose continuing to unfold?
Well, one thing that I never realized that I would enjoy so much before I became Miss Kentucky was public speaking. I used to hate it, and I used to hate, like, talking about myself. And throughout this past year, it's still a little uncomfortable sometimes for me to talk about myself, but throughout this last year, I've realized that even if I am a little bit uncomfortable in these situations, I would rather deal with that discomfort than have a child go without because of it. Because I didn't do it. And I remember going into schools all throughout this year so far and just seeing so many kids who will come up to me and be so excited to have me sign their sneakers or to tell me that they were in foster care too. I remember the week after I won Miss Kentucky, I was still dealing with a lot of backlash about my story and, the people saying things. And I had this little girl come up to me, and I was so upset at this point. And I was trying to be the best Miss Kentucky, so I wasn't really showing it. She didn't know that everything that I'd been going through, but this girl couldn't have been older than 8. And she came up to me and she said, I was in foster care too. I didn't know people like us could do things like that. And I cry every time that I think about that, because that just changed the way that I looked at this job. At first I was like, I can't do this. Like, what's the point? Like, everybody's right. Like, maybe my judges did just feel sorry for me, and I was just really getting in my head about it. And when she said that, I was like, no, like, I did not do all of this to give up now. I did this so that people would look up to me, and so people would believe that they could accomplish something that they didn't think that they could accomplish. And from that day on, I just remember not making it my goal to impress everyone, but to be there for kids.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I've been able to do every single day as Miss Kentucky, and I think that I will continue doing that even after I give away my title, is speaking to these kids. I would love to become a professional public speaker, or to write a book, or something like that about my story, because I think that it's a message that needs to be heard. And I love kids, and I love talking to them. So probably speaking in my future, but I plan to go back to the University of Kentucky to finish my bachelor's degree in social work and psychology. And I'm hoping to go to Yale to study public policy.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. Well, you're just set up to make all the difference in the world.
Thank you.
I mean, you really are. Ariana, your story is a reminder that circumstance doesn't define us, it refines us. Thank you for using your voice and your crown to spark change and give others hope. And for those listening, we'll link Ariana's platform, social media, and ways to get involved in supporting foster youth in the show notes. If this conversation inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that beauty, true beauty, comes from courage, character, and purpose. Thanks for joining me on Charm and Circumstance. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow along on Instagram, because charm is personal and circumstance is what you make of it.